And that's why I mentioned in the beginning the connection with infections, because you could be, been bit by a tick as a child and you're fine. You might have gotten Lyme disease, but you don't need to be treated. Your immune system is robust in keeping that under control. But you get exposed to mold, and all of a sudden your immune system can no longer keep that old Epstein-Barr or that old herpes virus. You get cold sores, or that shingles, that's chickenpox gets reactivated, or the Lyme disease. You get pain, you get headaches, you get fatigue. So all these old infections, which we all have some of them, can be reactivated in the setting of a mold exposure because that weakened immune system.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the Ancient Health Podcast. I'm so glad that you joined us today, because this conversation with Dr. Jill Carnahan is going to be an incredibly eye-opening and hopefully super encouraging conversation for you. Now, if you're not familiar with her work, you will be by the end of this interview. But she is a doctor of functional medicine. It's board certified in family medicine and integrative holistic medicine. She is the medical director of Flatiron Functional Medicine and brings a unique perspective to treating patients in the midst of even the most complex and chronic illnesses. And this is something we talk a lot about on the show. Her clinic specializes in searching for underlying triggers that contribute to illness through cutting-edge lab testing and tailoring the intervention to specific needs. On a more personal level, she is the survivor of breast cancer, Crohn's disease, and toxic mold illness. I can't wait to unpack this and really get your experience and story. But I am so thrilled to also talk about her upcoming book, Unexpected: Finding Resilience Through Functional Medicine, Science, and Faith. And I feel like even that title alone just gets me so excited to unpack all of that. So that's going to be released in March, right when this podcast is dropping. So make sure you check that out. She's the executive producer and featured in a new documentary. So she has been busy working so hard to the journey to overcoming illness, called Doctor and Patient, to be distributed also this year in 2023. So Dr. Jill Carnahan, thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation.
You're welcome, Courtney. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you.
We're really thrilled for the work you're doing, because it's very much the topics around which all of our audience and listeners are trying to access and learn for themselves, because these are the things, these are the tools that people are looking for that are going to free them from these patterns of chronic disease. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about the toxic mold experience that you've had, because I think we could start there. And there's a lot that we could probably do 4 conversations around all the different things that you have personally had to face. But with toxic mold specifically, what are these signs and symptoms people should be aware of? Because I think that the thought that, well, if I can't see it, it's not there, then we dismiss that that's probably not something that we're dealing with. But I'm beginning to believe that that's not the case. And a lot of times this is a major trigger for people's diseased states.
Yes, absolutely, Courtney. So the deal is most of the time, like I could be in this, lovely study, and there could be mold behind the walls, and it could be massively affecting my health or causing me to complain of symptoms of chronic fatigue or headaches or fibromyalgia, or even a new diagnosis of autoimmunity. And the most common thing that people complain of when they're exposed to mold and don't know it is cognitive dysfunction. So word finding, difficulty with concentration, memory, focus, things. And we just assume we're aging, but it's not true. Our environment has a huge impact. I always frame functional medicine in one way that I look at how, when a patient comes in, it's almost always a combination of toxic load, of which mold is one of the things in our environments, and infectious burden. So these kind of interplay between old infections that tend to pop up, old viruses, old, tick-borne infections, things that pop up, in addition to toxic exposure. And the toxic exposure, the way that plays out is it often weakens our immune system. So it leaves us more susceptible to either new infections or old infections. And all of this creates inflammation, often autoimmunity, where the body attacks itself. So a patient could have a new diagnosis of MS or lupus or Hashimoto's, or just chronic pain or brain fog or fatigue or hormonal disruptions. And all these things are layers that maybe the root cause is mold. Now, my story began in Boulder, Colorado. After the floods, there was this 1,000-year flood in 2013. caused literally billions of dollars of damage. Half the town was underwater, and very unexpected. And this basically really was a catalyst to causing lots and lots of extensive water damage to buildings in the city. And some were older, some were newer, didn't really matter. My office in particular in the south end of Boulder was flooded. The basement was flooded. We were still able to practice. And unbeknownst to me, there was this dark, toxic black mold growing in my basement. I was 2 levels up. I was on the 2nd story, and I was right over an unfinished crawl space. And again, at that time, I had no clue about mold, how it grows, the construction of homes, and all these things. And I've kind of had to become a building expert in some ways. I leave it to the real experts, but I know enough to help the patients navigate. And I know now, like, an unfinished crawl space with water standing is a definite risk for mold. And anytime that air from the crawl space in your home or your workplace is continuous with the air of your home, it can bring in the mold into your house. So that was one thing. And then in the basement, there was also growing this mold. So it was several things. In my 2nd story office, the contractor, I didn't know any better at the time, but he literally put down a beautiful brand new bamboo floor over some old carpet that was probably 15, 20 years old. So you can imagine I was stepping, every time I stepped, I would be very soft, bamboo soft in the carpet underneath. And it was puffing these puffs of probably old toxic mold. And I started going downhill. I started having word finding difficulty. I started having rashes. My eyes became really inflamed and red and irritated. I was exhausted every day. I was going downhill and I had no clue what was happening. Now, I knew that environment could have something to do with it, and I started to put it together. And what's funny, and I want to just speak to your listeners, because so often when mold is an issue, people are really either in denial or hesitant to test or treat because it's overwhelming. I was no different. I thought, okay, if it is mold, do I have to leave my office? Do I have to sell my practice? Like, what's the consequences? And the difficulty with mold is the consequences often are psychologically and financially incredibly, exorbitant. And so I didn't really know what it was going to be. But finally, I got so sick that I had to figure it out. I did a test in my urine to check for mycotoxins, and it was positive for the black mold, what they call trichosethines, which is a mycotoxin produced by the black mold. So this was in my body. I was excreting it in the urine. And at the same week, I had an inspector come out. We did bulk samples of the basement, and Stachybotrys, one of these black toxic molds that produces that same toxin that was in my body, was found. So I knew, bingo, there's your detective work. I knew mold was causing it. And literally, Courtney, it was the day after Christmas, 2014, literally like days after I found the results, I did not set foot back in my office. I left the office. I actually practiced from home while I found a new space. And then I found a new space, and I literally sold everything there. I had 20 years of medical textbooks and books, and I love books. I gave them all away. I got rid of them because I didn't want that to affect me. Now, I do want to say a caveat. Just because you have mold, or if you find mold, does not mean you have to sell everything, walk out of your house. For me, at that point, I realized intuitively through prayer meditation, I knew this was so toxic that I had to change, and I had to do dramatically. And it literally gave me back my health over time. So for me, it was the right choice. Not everybody has to do that. You can remediate, you can fix it. In this case, I had a landlord involved that wasn't willing to admit there was an issue. So I didn't have a choice. I couldn't fix the problem. I had to leave.
Wow. And I think this is really interesting because you had an obvious water exposure that created this mold, but that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people. And this is where I feel that mold gets swept under the rug, or people, because like you said, there is so much that is required. If you really suspect mold, are you going to sell your house? You're going to have to fix the problem, because then you don't want to sell it to somebody else, and now it's their problem. And it's like, I know about it. This is tens of thousands of dollars. I don't even want to believe that mold's the issue. I'll just try as many different protocols as I can and see if I can just get myself better, because it's a giant hassle. It's extremely expensive. And I'm overwhelmed thinking about what that process is going to look like if I really believe that this is a root cause. So for most people that maybe are like, okay, well, I'm fine. My house hasn't flooded. I don't have a roof leak. My house is brand new. But I already believe that that's probably not necessarily true. So what is it that people should be thinking about if they're doing all of these little Band-Aid approaches, and even the healthy Band-Aid approaches, trying to take all the binders, trying to take all the glutathione, all these things, oh, it'll be fine. I'll find the right supplement, and then my brain fog will be gone. Probably not the best strategy. So I'm probably long-winded with this question, but you know where I'm going with it in terms of what do people really, to have that, really critical eye to say, it could actually be a possibility?
Yeah. So number one rule of mold and biotoxin exposure is you will not get well if you are still getting massive exposures. There's no amount of supplements, sleep protocols, prayer, anything that you can do that will overcome that toxic burden. It's like bailing out a boat that's leaking and you're just like trying to tread water, but you can't really make any progress. So number one, if you've tried a lot of things and you're like, nothing's really working for me, I'll tell you in clinical practice, I see this all the time because I'll see patients where I put them on a protocol that should work. And then we try again with maybe a slight variation of the protocol that should work. And over and over and over again, we get no traction. I almost always find in those cases, there's a mold at the root and they're in this exposure where, again, it's that bailing out the leaking boat. It's also, I've talked about toxic load as we all have this bucket ability to detox. It's like we're born with a bucket. My bucket, when I was born on the farm, I got cancer at a young age, was really small. So it didn't take long for that bucket to fill up with water and flow over the top. And when the bucket starts filling up, that's your toxic load and flows over the top. It presents with autoimmunity, neurodegenerative, cognitive decline, even things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, and other things like cancers. And again, in my case, it's exactly what my story is about. My toxic load got high, bucket overflowed. So in the case of mold, if you are trying all these things and you're not getting better, you may want to consider. Now, the other thing, so number one is you do have to get out of the situation. Number two is it is overwhelming and there's literally a chemical effect. I did this in research for the book. There's studies on the chemical effect of inhalation of mycotoxins and other chemicals on the limbic system. So literally, even if you're, you have a great faith, you have great family, you are emotionally, healthy and you've done all that work and you don't have any issues, even so, mold has a massive traumatic PTSD effect on our body just from the chemical inhalation on our limbic system. So when someone is in mold, not only are they dealing with this little bit of overwhelm of, oh, what do I do about this? Is it my house? And our home is our safe place, right? It's where we raise our families, where we go sleep, where we eat, where we, nourish ourselves. And because it's our safe place, all of a sudden there's a threat to our safety. It's a big deal on a really biochemical level. So that's part of the problem. The way that I kind of decipher if this is an issue is I talk to patients about, have you gone on vacation lately? Have you left for 10 or 14 days? Or have you, gone out of your house? Because often if you listen to the story, they'll say, oh, well, back in 2018, I bought this house and ever since then I've not been well. Or, you know what? I went to Hawaii for 2 weeks last year and I felt the best I've ever felt. All my symptoms went away. Or I had recently a patient, they went camping and they're sleeping on the ground and they're outside their house. And she's like, all of my bowel symptoms went away. And you might not think of bowels and mold, but they are absolutely connected. You can have exacerbation of fungal overgrowth or bacterial overgrowth or many different things in the bowel based on the mold exposure, weakening the immune system. So all these clues are clues. And then the overwhelm of what to do. Well, first of all, you need to get a good inspector, but you can do some things on your own first. If you're like, I don't want to spend a lot of money, I want to just check and see. I often recommend that patients get a qPCR test. It's also called ERMI, and you can buy these online. It basically takes dust from your home and the company will check for DNA of the mold in that dust in your home because mold and mold spores and mycotoxins are all carried on the dust in your home. So you can check and see historically a snapshot of the dust in your home. Is there mold in that? If there's some really nasty mold in there's probably an issue because again, 99% of people, there's not like a visible water stain or a visible massive issue. Now, there are some things you can do yourself. Look under your sinks. Is the wood warped? Was there a previous leak under the sink, under your dishwasher? Is your flooring, if you have hardwood, is it starting to warp or starting to, buckle? You can look at the windowsills. Is there any signs of water intrusion? You can look at your ceilings and the corners of your roof. Make sure that the air between your attic and your home is not, contaminated, because if that attic air has some issues and it's coming into your home through like the can lighting or things that aren't sealed off, crawl spaces are huge, as I already mentioned. So check your crawl space. Is there standing water? Well, that's going to have mold. And then if your crawl space communicates with your home, air is going to be exchanged. And these molds themselves, the spores are bad enough. I mean, they can cause allergies and histamine reactions and mast cell activation, but those are big particles. What happens a lot of times is those molds are producing the mycotoxins, and that's what you can check in the human body in the urine. And those mycotoxins are VOCs, they're volatile organic compounds. They're like 2.5 microns or smaller. They can go right right into our lungs, diffuse into our alveoli and into our bloodstream immediately. Do not pass go. You don't need any transport. So they can get into our bloodstream just through inhalation very quickly. And these are very small. And those are the things, say there's an issue behind my wall right here, those mycotoxins are still going to come through and cause illness in the human body.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty, there's a lot when you think about your house, the way that our houses are built, there are so many different points of intrusion, like where, and mold is invasive. I mean, if you think you've just had one little tiny leak with a sink in one part of your house, you'll be shocked. Like you said, the dust, right? Dust is like, it's everywhere and it gets carried through the vents. I mean, I can even feel the air vents right now in my own home, and it's sucking air up and intake, and then it's taking it to different parts of the house and dumping it out. So, even if you think you've got an isolated problem, I can tell you from personal experience and exactly what you're just saying, that it is incredibly invasive. And even the smallest amounts can start producing incredibly lethal types of mycotoxins that are, they're lethal to your cells. Like they will make you feel terrible.
Yeah, I mean, these toxins are used to, like, they're being studied in chemical warfare. They're very, very toxic, and there's several different classes. The typical aflatoxins, ochratoxins, they often increase mast cell activation, which can cause a whole host of things, including heartburn, palpitations, anxiety, insomnia, brain fog, etc. And then there's other toxins like mycophenolic acid, which is actually the chemical compound. It's from mold that's used to create a drug called Cellcept. Cellcept is used to prevent organ transplant rejection. So it's a complete immunosuppressive drug. It's made from mycophenolic acid, which I can test in the urine of patients who have been exposed to mold. So then we see this massive immune suppression. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning the connection with infections, because you could be, been bit by a tick as a child and you're fine. You might have gotten Lyme disease, but you don't need to be treated. Your immune system is robust in keeping that under control. But you get exposed to mold, and all of a sudden your immune system can no longer keep that old Epstein-Barr or that old herpes virus. You get cold sores, or that shingles, that's, chickenpox gets reactivated, or the Lyme disease, you get pain, you get headaches, you get fatigue. So all these old infections, which we all have some of them, can be reactivated in the setting of a mold exposure because that weakened immune system.
This brings up another question then with the immune system specifically, because I think that's a really important correlation there with those diseases, because how many people do we know that are dealing with mast cell activation? They're dealing with autoimmune stuff. They're dealing with MS, like you name it. There are so many different things. You can just run down the list. But what is that connection? What is it that these exposures are doing that's altering our gut microbiome and then consequently our immune system becoming dysregulated? And I know we can land on a lot of different things there, but explain maybe what that mechanism of action is happening when we're talking about mold specifically in relation to the gut and the immune system.
Yeah, so mold has been known to do a lot of disruption of the HPA axis, and this is like our control center. So it controls our adrenals and our thyroid and all of our female and male hormones, and really even our leptin and adiponectin, which relate to diabetes or to weight gain. A lot of patients will have 20, 30, 40 or more pounds of weight gain suddenly with no changes, because that mold toxins will stick in the leptin receptors and cause weight loss to be impossible. And they could literally probably stop eating and they can't lose weight. So mold actually sabotages our ability to metabolize and burn fat for fuel. It also affects the brain. Like I said, it can cause aromatase upregulation, which can cause men and women to take their testosterone stores, which keeps muscle and strong and healthy and good libido, and pull that into estrogen. So women will have estrogen dominant symptoms like heavy bleeding, painful periods, endometriosis, fibrocystic breast, or even just PMS symptoms. Men will tend to have central weight gain, man boobs, and all these symptoms of dominance of estrogen. It sabotages the adrenals. There's a specific mold called chitomium that really lowers cortisol. So I'll see people come in with HPA axis dysfunction, very low cortisol, exhaustion, and just that flatline adrenal on testing. And that can also be from mold exposure. So, and thyroid, and it can cause Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So back to the gut, how this happens is mold in one case will lower MSH. MSH is one of the barrier things that will help, like we saw in mice models, when MSH was gone or lowered, they developed inflammatory bowel disease. So mold can actually sabotage some of the chemicals that help keep our gut stable and prevent leaky gut. And so when there's mold, there's almost always intestinal permeability. You can have more overgrowth of bacteria or fungi, and then you have leaky gut because the membranes are compromised. You can have dysfunction with absorption of nutrients. So all of these things, and I'm leading to autoimmunity because the gut immune interface, where our gut lumen interfaces with the bloodstream, is where everything starts with autoimmune disease. So often it's the microbiome that's leaking into the bloodstream next door. These coatings of microbes called lipopolysaccharides sneak in, and they're a big trigger for immune inflammation. And as soon as you start poking the immune system through a leaky gut, often you get this overreaction, production of cytokines, and that leads to autoimmunity, where your body mistakes self for foreign invader and starts to make antibodies. So even mold can create this milieu in the gut, or this breakdown of your membranes that lead to autoimmunity.
Wow. I mean, the cascade, it goes downstream. And so in talking about autoimmunity too, because this is so prevalent, I mean, the number of children now that we're seeing that are already expressing autoimmune conditions, what is the brain connection there? Because you talk a lot about this on social media, and I imagine it's a part of your new book that's coming out as well, but the relationship of emotional health, self-worth, because here's the thing, we're all going through something, nobody's health is perfect ever. And I think that there is a very strong connection between the way that we view our bodies and our body's ability to heal and the condition that we're facing, because our body's always working for us, but sometimes in our mind, we kind of give up on ourselves. And we start to think, it's just never going to happen for me. I'll never lose this extra weight. I'll never have the energy like my friend. And also, I just won't ever be able to accomplish what they accomplish. So can you connect those for us? Because that's a really important component here when we're talking about any type of chronic disease.
Yes. Oh, such a great question. And yes, I go deep in the book. Just a little history about the book. 8 years ago, God put on my heart to write this. And I literally was arguing, like, who am I? I don't know what I'm doing. I can't write a book. It's funny. And God's just like, all you have to do is obey. I will give you everything you need, like the resources, the publisher, all that. All you have to do is tell. And it was literally in my heart. All you have to do is tell your story. And at that time, I thought it was going to be about environmental toxicity. That was my big thing. I'd seen so many things from breast cancer to Crohn's in my own life to mold toxicity, how the environment affected illness. And I'm seeing today the biggest elephant in the room is the environmental toxic load and how it affects our bodies. So I was really adamant about bringing this story. And it kept coming back to me telling the story. But the most important thing there is, in the subsequent years, which it literally was 8 years since I first had this on my heart, I experienced a toxic divorce, some very difficult relationships, and my own inner work around, how do I feel about myself? How does this affect my immune system? And I've done thousands of hours of work and therapy, and some of the most profound changes in my own body, my health, and my immune system were around exactly what you're asking about. It wasn't just the environmental toxins, it was the emotional toxins, the childhood trauma, the way we believe and view ourselves, and those things are transformational. And I'm so glad it took me those years, because I had so much more to add to the book on this level of healing, which is really some of the most profound healing. So let's talk about that. What does it look like? How does it manifest? There's a couple stories I have. Number one, back in the day, 25-year-old breast cancer in medical school. I was fighting for the battle of my life, very aggressive. I did chemotherapy, radiation, and it was a fight, right? Like, I fought cancer. We talk about that mentality of fighting, and I won. I beat the cancer. And 26, I was considered in remission, but I had gone through, to hell and back, really, as far as losing my hair and completely malnourished, and my gut was destroyed. 6 months later, I got Crohn's disease. Once again, I'm going to fight Crohn's. I'm going to beat it. And I did. I overcame. I don't have Crohn's anymore. And I was told that was incurable. I was told that, and now I talk about reversible autoimmunity, is actually we have control. We can reverse these conditions. Whereas the traditional medical system, when there's not a drug for the condition, they consider it incurable. And that's just not true. So all that to say, that fight was my mental game, and it worked. And then along came mold. And with mold, what happens is mold triggers your innate immune system. We saw this with COVID to produce cytokines and inflammatory molecules that cause damage. So all of a sudden, your own body is creating the damage and creating the illness and creating the issue. It's an external trigger. But once that trigger gets going, it's like a vicious cycle inside your body. And so with mold, it's no different. The mold is a massive toxic trigger and weakens your system. But then your own body is going to war with yourself. And I realized one day as I was walking, this fight mentality is not going to cure me. This fight mentality is going to kill me. and I have to change my story. And I remember just thinking and praying, and I had just heard a story of a man who needed a bone marrow transplant for a type of leukemia. And the doctors told him, we're going to need to harvest this many of your cells from your bone marrow. And the guy was very into meditation and prayer. He said, how can I do that? And they said, well, there are some studies. And he ended up doing some prayer and meditation around nourishing his bone marrow. When he went to get the biopsy, the doctors were astounded at the amount of blood cells they were able to harvest, like 10 times the normal. And they asked him what he did. And he said, it's all here, it's all the mind. And I thought, well, why can't I do that? So that day I came up with a little story in my head, and it involved the little minions, the little yellow minions from Despicable Me, because that was just an image. I was like, these guys are my immune helpers. And I literally for days, every time I meditated and prayed, I would think about these little minions being in my body, and they were cleaning, they were like sweeping the streets of the toxic mold, but they were whistling, they were friendly, they were not fighting. They were in harmony with my system and escorting out this toxin in a way that was helpful and not, fighting. And I literally changed my mindset, and I started to heal. And there's lots of other things I did, but I have no doubt that changing my story around the fight was part of the reason why I'm still healthy today, and I've overcome mold-related illness. It worked for cancer, and then I had to change the story. And then I say that because there's so many metaphors with Gabor Mate and Peter Levine's work on trauma, somatic experiencing, and some of these things. Autoimmunity at a metaphorical level is attack of self. And again, I've experienced this, so I had to really go through. And I came from a really fundamental conservative religious culture that was beautiful and gave me my faith that I have today, and it really was loving and a beautiful place for me to grow up. But part of that culture was deny yourself and love others. And I did that, and I did that well. But there's a place there where that denial of self can go so deep that it's almost self-hatred or self-loathing, where we don't accept ourselves. We hate parts of ourselves. We're like, oh, I'm too big here, or too small here, or my brain's not smart enough, or all those things, those messages that we have. And unfortunately, I took it to a different level. It wasn't what the culture gave me, but I took it to a level of more self-loathing and hatred. And I did develop autoimmunity, and I had to change that message. And again, through my faith in God and many, many different ways of people in my life and things, I realized, oh, God loves me. I can love myself. That's not wrong. And I had to change the story because I was so conditioned to think that self-love is evil or wrong. And I had to actually be like, no, I actually thank you, God. And I literally started thanking God every day for this body that took me through. I always say I'm like a cat with 9 lives. I should have died so many times, Courtney. Like, I'm here living. I am a miracle. And that miracle is partially because the body that God gave me has been so resilient. And when I started having such deep love and gratitude for these cells, this body, my breasts, all the pieces of my body, my gut, my immune system, that actually transformed my health too. And I started talking, we have to love ourselves. And I mean, God shows us that because he loves us that much too. So it's like this beautiful, beautiful thing that I didn't understand. And in that same way, my intuition in the relevance of science and how I was trained in medicine, we're taught to think analytically. The science is the only thing you can trust. And I was born this very intuitive, heart-based, empathic child, right? But I had to kind of push that all aside, become this analytical engineer, all science-based, which is great. I love the science. But what I had to come back to in order to heal my patients, is this heart-based intuition has knowledge. And for me, it's from a divine source, right? And so that place of loving myself and trusting my own intuition in a really healthy way was absolutely, I will say, the most transformational piece in my own personal healing.
I'm just emotional even listening to that story, because I can feel just the emotional honesty and vulnerability in that. And there's something very supernatural. And I love that your faith was so integral, into that healing, because let's be honest, we fail ourselves all the time. We will forever, because we are human. This is the nature of humanity, that we will always fall short. Other people are going to not. They're not going to, hit the mark all the time either. And so until we can accept the love that's already there for us, and embrace, lean into this heart posture of gratitude, we're going to be stuck in a constant battle and kind of this hamster wheel of chasing, disease and feeling defeated, because to be honest, like you'll get up from a day-to-day basis. And if you wake up and you've got a headache and your body hurts and it aches and it feels puffy, guess what? Those circumstances are now going to tell you the way that you're going to feel the rest of the day. And I just love that picture of just receiving. Like, it doesn't matter where you are on your healing journey. You can feel terrible, but if you get up and that mindset, you have this place of gratitude. And I think I've said this before on other podcasts, but as long as you have breath in your lungs, you have the ability to heal. Like, you are granted, your body is working for you, but you've got to get your mind in the right place. And whether you've got a spiritual practice or relationship or not, like, I think just bringing that awareness to the fact that, your body may feel really broken, but there is healing that's for you. And until you can start to believe that and access it, like really, truly believe that your body is showing up for you and that healing is for you, you will always feel like that disease owns you, that's a label that you carry on your life.
I love you. I want to just mention there, because so often when we identify, so our identity is part of our habits and part of our healing. So if I say I am a non-smoker, I don't eat gluten, I could go anywhere in the world. Someone could offer me a cigarette, which I would just laugh, right? Like, no, I'm not a smoker. I'm sorry. Or I've eaten gluten. And I'm just like, no, my identity is I don't smoke. I don't drink alcohol. I don't eat gluten, whatever. And we can do the same thing about I am a healthy person, because our identity will drive all of our choices and behaviors. And and it's funny, I say this because I'm a cancer survivor. I rarely say those words, because there's nothing wrong with that. If you're out there, you're a survivor. I'm proud of you and I'm proud of me. But the truth is, like, I never identify. There's so many times when I wake up, and especially when I write my book, I'm like, oh yeah, I did go through cancer. There's almost this like, I don't identify with that at all. And same with the Crohn's, and same with so I never grabbed those and took them into my identity. I was like, no, I don't have Crohn's. I'm going to overcome this. And it wasn't denial. It was a healthy way of viewing it as something that affected me, but didn't own me. I did not own me. And if you're out there suffering from illness, your illness does not own you. It's not your identity. And it's so easy for us to fall into the victim mindset of, oh, I have this, I'm going to be disabled forever. I'm going to be, and granted, I have the deepest compassion, because I have been there. I have suffered through so many things where I thought, and even like with the mold, my face was covered with sores and acne, and my eyes were red. I looked horrendously ill, and all of those times. But when you identify with it, it actually changes how you deal with it. So if we can actually say, no, this happened not to me, but for me. And again, a big part of my book is looking at suffering, looking at difficulties, looking at illness as a teacher, as something that came into your life for a purpose for your soul to transform to a better, more resilient version of yourself. And if you can frame that, it doesn't take away the suffering. And I've been there. So I have the deepest compassion if you're out there and you're sick and you're like, I don't know if I could do another day. But the truth is, it doesn't own you and it doesn't define you. And if you can really separate from that and believe that there's something else possible, I think every one of you out there has a potential to heal.
That's beautiful. Gosh, I love that so much. And that is so true. I hope you feel that hope. I hope it's tangible, that it's palpable for you. And if you're listening or you're driving or you're walking, whatever it is, like, take a moment, like put your hand over your heart, take a deep breath, like really have one of those defining moments where you say, okay, today is where I change the way that I'm thinking about all of this, because you are always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. So wherever your brain, and it will happen daily, it always does, we're just pre-bent, we're conditioned, we create these neural pathways. So we tend to fall in the same patterns of critical thinking, and we land in the same places. But you can recreate those pathways in your brain, but you've got to know that that's where you're going to be headed all the time by default. So change the direction of those thoughts. You said that so beautifully. I absolutely love it. And so I imagine you address this in the book, but I would love to know on a practical level how you were able to find purpose and meaning in some of this pain. Like, what was it that you did on a day-to-day basis? And maybe it was just a simple practice, or maybe it was, a spiritual triathlon in the morning, but what's an actionable step for somebody that they feel all the pain, they feel they're wearing the diagnosis and it's heavy. Like, what is something that is like a very doable action step for them that can get them to a place where they feel hope, where they feel like, okay, I'm on a healing journey now. I'm not on a sick journey.
Yeah, so I want to frame that with just a short story, which was one of the first experiences. Um, when I had breast cancer again, I was 25 years old. I had just hit my 25th birthday, so almost 24. And I was in the middle of medical school. And in the medical center where I was diagnosed, I was literally at that time the youngest one they'd ever diagnosed. Now, since then, sadly, there's a lot of young women with breast cancer. And this diagnosis is a death sentence. I was with about 10 or 12 women under 40 in a support group, and I'm the only one still living at that time. So it's just like, it's horrendous. And so it's a very different, a lot of times 60, 70-year-old women get this, it's slower growing. It can still be very fatal. So I don't want to diminish that, but I was dealing with a death sentence. And I remember knowing that, understanding that, and I was in medicine, right? I knew that. And I just thought, do I have 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years? I didn't know. Now I'm healthy. It's 21 years later. So I'm doing well. But at that moment, I didn't know. And I did have a faith, and I want to just speak, I'm talking a lot about my faith, but even if you're out there and you don't have a faith, there is studies, the blue zones, which are where the most centenarians, these are people over 100 live. There's Italy and Japan and Loma Linda and Costa Rica. And one thing they all have in common, and they're all different parts of the world, they're all different faith practices, they do have a belief in a higher purpose and a higher power. All of them. And again, they manifest it different ways, but that's a commonality of these people who live long. So I'm saying this because the science supports that faith in something greater than yourself, regardless of your beliefs, if you're listening, really is a powerful healer. So my own personal journey, I'm literally in the car weeks after my diagnosis on the radio. I hear this minister come on, and he speaks this verse from the Bible, and it says, "This sickness will not end in death, but it's for the glory of God." And I was just, that moment, I remember, I'll never forget it, because for me, that was speaking to me that this thing you're going through, Jill, is not about your suffering. And there's something good. It's like what I told you earlier, is if we can look for the beauty and the teaching in those suffering moments. And that was my first lesson. It was like, my first lesson of my teacher of cancer was, trust that something good will come out of this. And I also felt like I was given a promise that I would live. And I grabbed onto that like a person grabbing onto a life preserver for dear life. And I held on the whole journey through the waves and the wind. And I'm like, no, I'm going to live. I'm going to live. And so if you can grab onto something, and maybe it's a gratitude for your family and the loved ones that you have around you that are loving you through this, or whatever it is, there's always something to be grateful for. For me, I grabbed onto that verse, and that was my life verse. And I grabbed onto that. I knew without a doubt. And because I believed, I think that actually helped to transform. And you can, again, find your own piece of belief and transformation. But when you're looking at suffering as a teacher, and I look back now, that platform of understanding and living breast cancer at 25, it's what my whole practice started becoming based on, because I said, I've been there, I know. So I started telling my story. And now I realize, like, that gave me such a gift in being able to heal the world and teach the world and do all these things, because that story and that understanding, and that's my documentary, Doctor Patient. I was like, how did you live both and actually come back to tell the story? Mm-hmm. And then practical things would be writing in a journal things you're grateful for every day, because our mind will focus on what we put it on. For me, I like grabbed onto this verse and I held it in front of me, and I knew I was going to live. And I think that actually helped me to get through the darkest times. So if there's something, maybe it's a mantra, maybe it's a verse, maybe it's something you could put in front of you every day and remind you. And number 2, writing gratitude or thinking gratitude or taking time to be grateful. Gratitude actually changes our hearts. And then the last thing is our younger version of ourselves, our 5-year-old self. Some of you have been through abuse. Some of you have been through trauma. Some of you had a great childhood, but there's this piece of loving ourselves and going back and actually being kind and compassionate to ourselves that heals our body and our cells. And when I started doing that work, instead of hearing the voices that are, oh, you're stupid, you're an idiot, or why did you do that? Or you're too big, or you're too small, or you're too, whatever things that we do, you're not enough. All those messages we hear and we tell ourselves, catch yourself, catch your brain, catch your inner dialogue. It's almost like a recording, right? Say, no, sweetheart, you're doing a great job. Wow. You look beautiful today. You can actually talk to yourself. I have a little note in my medicine cabinet still today. If I go and show you, it's still there. And I put this there a couple years ago, and it says, what does she need from me today? It's this kindness and compassion. We are so good at putting that out into the world. But when we can turn it around and reflect it back to our own selves and our childhood selves that maybe had some difficulties or traumas, and love that part of ourselves, it literally transforms our body and our mind and our health.
Oh, man. Guys, I'm a puddle over here. I'm not going to lie. This is like probably one of the most touching conversations. And I think it's ministering to my heart in a way that like I didn't even expect or even feel like I needed. So I hope that it is ministering to you on that level too, that it is just deeply touching a part of you that maybe you've neglected or not honored, just like you talked about. It's that, getting back to your childhood and who you were, like what really made your spirit light up. Because I think a lot of times we get so lost and disconnected from that. And then as an adult, we feel like, well, that's that's not an adult thing, or I'm in a different season and phase of life. Like, but we very much just see what is being reflected back to us in the season, in the present right now. And what I hear you saying is that there's so much more that we need to be able to love and appreciate for ourselves and the journey that we've been on. And the story, what's interesting, it just came to mind was you were talking about your story, and your story is truly incredible, what you've experienced, what you've been through. And I truly believe that you are standing in the purpose of those struggles, like right now, and that's because this was the fruit that is coming from, that battle and those obstacles, and doesn't mean that it was easy or, that it was enjoyable to go through, but you were standing in the purpose of that. And the story part is so interesting because how many of us think, well, our story is insignificant. I'm not a doctor. I'm not somebody that is going to write a book. I'm not somebody whose, story really matters. What would you say to that person that just feels like, well, yeah, I have a story, but like, I don't have influence. I don't have, a platform or anything like that. So what's the point of me mapping it out or journaling it out or acknowledging it? Somebody that maybe just feels discouraged by, their own path and journey.
Oh, Courtney, I love this question because one of the things in writing the book, it is my story. And it's funny because there's a million books out there on my shelf here that are, my colleagues and friends, amazing stuff, how to cure autoimmunity in 30 days, this paleo diet, or, you name it. These are amazing books, amazing resources. I knew in my heart that I had to do something different. And I remember some of the books I've read where like you savor part of a chapter every night, and you like almost don't want the book to finish because it so touches your soul. And I remember like knowing before I wrote this book, I need to write my story. And I had publisher after publisher tell me, Jill, you can't write a memoir. You're not well enough known. Like you're not a celebrity. You're not, like in that big era. And I just kept going back to, no, I have to tell my story because the story is our connective tissue. And even in writing this, I'm saying that because what my hope and prayer is that the reader or anyone listening who reads the book is going to be touched on their journey, and they're going to see themselves. I literally prayed that this would be a reflection for the reader, that they could see pieces of themselves that needed to heal or transform, and that it literally would be transformative in their life and not really about me. Like I uses my story, but it's not really about me. It's about you. It's about you, the reader, the listener, the whatever, and even listening to this podcast. It's not about me. I'm not here to promote myself. I'm here to encourage you that you can be transformed in your illness and whatever you're facing, and that there is hope and there is ability to be resilient. And I will stand on the mountaintops and shout that. And that is as you can tell, I get really passionate about it because it's so important to encourage. And now more than ever, we need hope. And if I can be a vessel of hope through my own story, but story is that connective tissue. So I'm saying this to you, you have a story, dear listener out there, you have your own story, and you may think it's insignificant. It is not, because maybe your neighbor, maybe your best friend, maybe your spouse needs to hear something in your story to help them transform. And we just continue to pass this on. My story isn't about me, it's about you. And your story isn't about you, it's about the next person that needs that love. And it could be someone that you meet in the parking lot, it could be a loved one, it'll surprise you, but there's someone in your life that needs to hear from you. And that's what really, really matters, is we continue to encourage one another through our stories. And our story is the only way that we can really connect on that level.
Wow. This has really been an absolute blessing of a conversation. And I'm so excited for this episode to launch. And because I just know that there are a lot of people carrying really heavy things right now. I mean, I don't know that I've ever felt that present, that just this heaviness, in overwhelm and defeat in so many people, and in a lot of women, honestly, too, because I've never seen so much brokenness from an emotional standpoint. And there's that huge connection to traumas that we've experienced that are maybe health related, maybe they're emotional, they're in the form of a relationship. But wherever you are, I hope you know that you are seen, that you are loved, that your story is important, that it has value, and there is purpose in your pain. And when you can start to see that as a gift, that you carry something that is unique to you because you were designed to carry it, not alone, not by yourself, not to be miserable, but because it is going to be a reflection for somebody else to grow and to heal from, because only you can speak to that level of pain to that person. I can't say that I've walked through Dr. Jill's story, but she can. But there's so many pieces of her story that minister to my heart, because I can see I can be encouraged by how she's been able to overcome, by the things that she's done. I'll never look at Minions the same, guys. The little Minions on Despicable Me. I mean, I will never not think of like these little immune helpers, and my kids are always watching that and stuff. And so it's so cute. But, this is just like one of those moments that I feel like it is a complete mindset shift. And I am so happy that we're having this conversation, because I can tell that this is your battle cry, that this is what you have lived for. And I believe that there's going to be a ripple effect of impact on people's lives because of it. So, wow, how encouraging. So, okay. I follow you on social and I love your content. I love how you're helping people on that platform. We've got the book that is out. Now we're recording this a little bit before, so it's not out yet, but I've got it on pre-order, so I'm excited. But if you're listening to it now, it is available. So make sure wherever you go and purchase books, Amazon or wherever, make sure that you get her book, because what we've just had in this conversation, I believe, is just beautifully communicated through this book on an even deeper level. But I would love for you to share, Dr. Jill, with us where people can connect with you if they are on that healing journey and they want to learn more. Maybe they suspect they have mold illness or mold toxicity, or maybe they've got another type of, autoimmune disease, or they've got something they've just been wrestling with for some time. Where can they connect with you or your practice, or your practitioners? How can people find you?
Thank you so much, Courtney. You mentioned Instagram and social, and I do tons of little soundbite tidbits on mold and all this. So Dr. Jill Carnahan on Instagram is a great place to find me, and find me doing silly things, because as we talked about play in childhood, dancing, coloring, like these things are actually really powerful healers. And part of my own journey was coloring. And speaking of coloring, at readunexpected.com, that's the site for the book. You can get it anywhere. I don't care where you get it, but there's some really cool things I put together for free gifts. So if you do purchase a book, go back to Read Unexpected, put in your receipt and your name, and I will send you a coloring journal that follows the book, a free lecture on mast cell activations, what to do if you get mast cell issues, a free audio recording that's I'm recorded speaking it that's not in the book, so a secret chapter. Anyway, so just some free fun stuff. Any way you want. Read Unexpected is about the book, and my actual practice is just my name, jillcarnahan.com.
Oh, amazing. I'm so excited to check out all these things. And we were talking before, I think we're going to have to do, maybe a book giveaway. We'll do something really fun here, because we just are so thrilled that you have been obedient into stepping into this assignment of mapping out your story and really giving people hope, in a world that is otherwise heavy, dark, and what seems to be hopeless in a lot of ways. So I believe there's so much blessing and favor on you and on this project. So I'm really excited about it. Guys, make sure you follow her. Like she said, she has great reels, great information. Like, it's unbelievably helpful. So if you're trying to learn about it, it's a great way to connect with her. Make sure you, if you like this episode, if you like the podcast, leave us a review. We love hearing from you. Oh my goodness, guys, we're in this together. This podcast exists because we want to empower you. We want you to have tools, things in your tool belt that are going to help you along your healing journey. So Dr. Jill, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. And guys, we will see you on the next episode.